He was signing his name to a piece of paper the way a man signs his name to something that has always belonged to him without ceremony, without announcement, without any awareness that the simple act of pressing a pen to a line on a government form would one day save everything he had spent 35 years building. The envelope from the county assessor's office had been sitting on the corner of his desk since Monday. It was a Tuesday morning now, bright and cold, with an October clarity that came in through the east-facing windows at a low angle and laid gold bars across the worn surface of the desk, across the open ledger books, across the stack of correspondence that had been waiting for attention since the weekend. He had gotten to the assessor's envelope last, as he always got to administrative paperwork last, because the administrative tasks of running a property did not require the same quality of presence as the human tasks. The envelope had waited. He had made it wait. Below him, 2 floors down, the community hall was already in motion. The Tuesday meal preparation began at 7 o'clock. Volunteers pulling folding tables from their storage racks along the south wall, unfolding them with the practiced efficiency of people who had done the same task the same way for years. The smell of chili had been rising through the floorboard since 8:30, layered now with the sweetness of cornbread coming out of the kitchen in the community hall, and underneath it, the particular warm human smell of a building that is used constantly and with love. He could hear voices from downstairs, a volunteer coordinator calling out an instruction, laughter responding the scraping of a metal chair on tile. He could have named the voices without seeing faces. He had known most of them for 15 years or more, some for all 35. The wooden sign above the back door of the hallway outside his office was visible from where he sat if he turned his head at the right angle. His father had installed it in 1990, in the summer of the year after the land purchase was finalized, on a Saturday afternoon, while his mother brought lemonade and watched from a folding chair with the satisfied expression of a woman whose family was building something that would outlast all of them. The sign was hand-painted, the letters formed by a man who was not a professional painter, but who had applied himself to the task with the same deliberate care he brought to everything a retired postal worker with large hands and a specific understanding of permanence, who knew that the things made to last required more than the correct materials. They required intention in the making. The letters read, "This ground is holy because we made it so." No one who came in from the parking lot and walked under that sign was ever told what it meant. No explanation was offered. No sermon was built around it. No plaque below it contextualized it. The understanding was the point. Every person who read those words felt the weight of the we, felt themselves included in it, felt that by walking under the sign they were stepping into something that had been built by accumulated human presence and was therefore theirs to share in. That was what Elias Harmon's father had understood. That was what the sign said below the words. He finished signing the form and set the pen down on the desk and slid the document across to his niece without looking up, the way a man performs a routine action in the presence of someone he trusts completely. Camille Harmon-Osei was 38 years old and had been a licensed real estate attorney for 11 years. She had graduated from Howard University School of Law and spent 4 years at a commercial real estate firm in the district before establishing her own practice, which handled property transactions, title disputes, deed challenges, and the full range of complicated situations that arise when legal documents and human intentions do not align. She had the professional stillness that the work produces in the people who are good at it, a practiced capacity to hold her expression neutral, while her mind moved through several things simultaneously to read a document and register its implications without letting those implications animate her face before she was ready. She picked up the form. She scanned it from bottom to top, the instinct of a professional reading for the detail that does not announce itself. She reached the header and paused. She moved her eyes back down the page and then up again to the ownership line. Camille said, "Uncle Elias, the deed name on this renewal. It reads Elias J. Harmon. Personal ownership. No organizational transfer ever recorded. She said it with the particular neutrality of a professional identifying a fact that has implications she has not yet fully traced. He looked up. His face was 67 years of weathered mahogany, the skin deeply creased along the jaw and at the outer corners of eyes that had never learned to appear smaller than they were. His hair had gone entirely gray at the temples, and white at the crown, cut close to his head in the same disciplined style he had worn since his 30s. When he met Camille's eyes, there was no urgency in his, no defensiveness, no reaching for an explanation. Only the patient steadiness of a man who has answered questions about this topic before and understands that answering it clearly this time will not resolve it permanently. He said always has been, always will be. He said it with the finality of something long decided settled in a way that preceded discussion. Camille held the form for a beat longer than necessary. In her professional life, she had spent 11 years reading property documents and tracing ownership chains and finding the precise small detail that would become a significant problem later. Not because she was looking for trouble, but because trouble in property law, she had learned, was almost always the same story told in different handwriting. The thing that was true but not made publicly visible. The ownership that lived in a file drawer rather than an accessible index. The deed that was correct but not connected to the name people would search under when the question arose. She had seen that gap produce consequences. She had seen it produce large consequences. She was seeing it now in a form that was at this moment entirely benign. The tax renewal was routine. There was no dispute, no pending challenge, no complication on the horizon. She was noting a structural exposure the way she noted all structural exposures, with professional attention and without alarm. She said, "Have you ever thought about recording a formal public notice? Something that makes the personal ownership explicit in the public index. If someone searched the property address, they would find the church nonprofit's name well before they found yours." He was already reaching for the signed form. He put it in the desk drawer and closed it. He said, "The deed is recorded at the county clerk's office. Anyone who needs to know already knows. Everyone who needs to find it can find it." He said it the way a man says something he has decided about so thoroughly that the deciding is behind him rather than present. It was not stubbornness Camille had come to understand over the years. It was a form of deep-rooted modesty, the conviction that the work itself was the announcement, and that a man who builds something does not need to advertise that he built it. 35 years of Tuesday meals. The sanctuary, the community hall, the youth center, the food pantry, all built on that parcel at the corner of Meridian and Grove Street, all built with money that had started as his personal savings and a private loan his father had co-signed, all paid off and standing and used every day of every week by 400 congregation members and the wider community they served. That was the record. That was the ownership document that mattered to him. Camille made a note on her notepad. She capped her pen. She recognized the conversation for what it was, complete for now until something changed. She did not push. She had been his niece for 38 years and his professional advisor for 11, and she understood when he was finished considering something. He locked the signed tax renewal in the desk drawer. The small brass lock clicked once, quiet and final. Through the window behind him, the October light was gold and clean on the corner of Meridian and Grove Street, falling on 2.3 acres of land that bore his name on a deed filed at the county clerk's office. A deed signed in 1989, with his father standing at his shoulder. The parcel purchased with savings accumulated over 12 years, and a private loan paid off in 4. The buildings raised over 35 years by construction crews hired from the congregation and the neighborhood. The mortgage on the main structures cleared in 2011, the title unencumbered and never transferred to another name. He had thought once briefly about transferring the deed to the church's nonprofit structure. He had raised it with a lawyer years before Camille had her degree. The lawyer had walked him through the process, and he had listened to all of it and then said no. He had said no, not for legal reasons, but for the same reason his father had painted that sign, because he understood something about permanence and about the difference between what is built by a person and what is administered by an organization. And he trusted the former more than the latter in the deepest part of himself, in the part where decisions that look like practicalities are actually convictions. The first event of the day was already underway downstairs. He went down to help. He would not think about the signed form in the drawer until 3 weeks later, when the reason for thinking about it arrived on the front steps. 3 weeks after that Tuesday morning, a patrol car from the Crestwood Police Department pulled to the curb in front of Cornerstone Fellowship Church at 6:47 in the evening during the height of the Tuesday community meal, while the food line still stretched from the main hall through the side corridor and out the front door, 12 people deep on the stone steps. The officer who got out was 32 years old and had been with the Crestwood Police Department for 7 years. He was built solidly, with the kind of physical presence that had probably been cultivated deliberately, the look of someone who understood that a uniform alone was not enough and who had supplemented it. His name was Darnell Briggs. He had 4 formal complaints in his personnel file from the previous 7 years, 2 for excessive force during traffic stops on the east side of the district, 1 for conduct unbecoming during a noise complaint response at an apartment complex, with a predominantly Black and Latino tenant population, 1 for filing an inaccurate incident report. All 4 had been reviewed. All 4 had been closed without finding. He had received 2 promotions in those 7 years. He had interpreted this sequence of events as information about himself. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment before going up the steps, hands clasped behind him, surveying the building with the expression of a man who is not gathering information but confirming a conclusion he arrived at earlier. Inside the community hall, the Tuesday meal was at its fullest. 83 people were seated and eating. 15 more were still in the serving line. The room smelled of chili and cornbread and the particular human warmth of many bodies in a space designed for gathering. Volunteer servers moved between the kitchen pass-through and the tables. Children were at the far end near the bank of tall windows, supervised by 2 regular tutors who had stayed to help with the meal. The sound of the room was high and layered and comfortable in the way that sounds are when the people producing them are at ease in the space, the sounds of a community that knows itself. Briggs pushed through the side entrance and stopped 3 steps inside. He put his hands on his hips and looked at the room. He looked at it for approximately 4 seconds with an expression that communicated nothing except that his evaluation was complete. He said loudly, "Who is in charge here?" It was not a question. The sentence had the shape of a question, but the pressure of a command, an announcement of arrival as much as a request for information. The room changed without going silent. Several conversations paused. Heads turned. The children at the far tables looked up with the alert, watchful attention of young people who have been taught by experience to read the quality of an adult's entrance. A volunteer server at the kitchen pass-through set down her ladle without moving anywhere. The man near the door, a congregation member who had been standing there for 20 minutes chatting, stepped back slightly. Elias Harmon was at the near end of the hall in conversation with an older woman whose granddaughter had started the after-school tutoring program that fall. He was 67 years old and tall, not simply in height, but in the way that men who have carried sustained weight for decades are tall, a verticality that goes into the floor, rather than simply rising from it. He was wearing his plain navy jacket over a white collar. He was the same in this room that he was in every room, which was the quality that people who knew him noticed most. He did not scale himself to the context. He was exactly himself everywhere. He heard Briggs's voice and finished the sentence he had been saying to the older woman. Something brief and warm, to which she nodded with a small smile, and then he walked across the hall toward the officer at the pace of a man who is not hurrying because he does not believe there is a legitimate reason to hurry. He said, "I am in charge here. I am Pastor Elias Harmon. How can I help you?" He extended his hand as he said it. It was an automatic gesture, an instinct toward greeting so deeply practiced it preceded calculation. Briggs did not take the hand. He looked at it for a moment and then back at Harmon's face, And in that moment, in the deliberate not taking of an offered hand, something was established between them that was more informative than anything either of them would say for the next several minutes. Briggs said, "I have a complaint on file. Unauthorized assembly, unlicensed use of premises. I need to see documentation that authorizes this gathering and this use of the building." He had a clipboard. He looked at it when he spoke, a gesture that added nothing to the information he was conveying but added considerably to the texture of it. Harmon said, "I am the pastor and the property steward. This is our Tuesday community meal. We have been conducting this meal on this property every Tuesday for 31 years. Briggs said, "Sir, I need to see documentation from the registered organization that holds this property. Something official. Something with a seal." He said the last sentence with a particular patience in his voice. The patience of someone explaining something to someone he believes should already understand it. Harmon said, "I own this land. I have owned it personally since 1989. The deed is filed at the county clerk's office under my name, Elias J. Harmon. If you need to verify this, I can provide a copy of the deed." He said it clearly, without heat, with the uncomplicated directness of a man stating a fact. Briggs did not write this statement down. He was holding a pen against the clipboard, but it did not move. He did not request Harmon's identification to cross-reference against any record. He did not radio into his dispatch to request a property ownership check, which his patrol car's onboard terminal, parked 30 feet away, could have produced in approximately 90 seconds. He did not ask a single question designed to explore whether what Harmon was saying was true. He looked at Harmon for one beat and then looked back at his clipboard. He said, "Sir, property ownership questions are something you can take up with the city. I am here on a filed complaint. I need you to produce written authorization from the registered organization, a nonprofit certificate, a leasing agreement, something that shows this organization is authorized to conduct public assembly on these premises within 72 hours. If you cannot produce that documentation, this location will be subject to a closure action pending city review." He said it with the smooth fluency of a man who has delivered similar announcements enough times that the words have lost any connection to the specific situation in which they are being used. They were a policy instrument. They served a function. The function was not inquiry. Harmon looked at him. Something moved in the deep, steady gaze, not anger, which would have been understandable, but recognition. The recognition of a man who has lived inside a world where this particular shape of encounter exists, who knows its structure and its intention, who is not surprised by it even as it lands with its full specific weight. He said, "I will provide documentation. I want you to understand clearly and for the record that what you are being told by whoever filed that complaint is not accurate. I own this property. I have owned it for 35 years. The documentation I provide will confirm this." Briggs said, 72 hours, sir." He left. The side door swung shut. The room was quiet for 3 full seconds, and then a woman at one of the tables near the back said something low to the person beside her, and a few conversations cautiously resumed. Changed in texture, now carrying something constricted and unresolved beneath the surface sounds of the continuing meal. Camille was seated at a table along the side wall. She had been present for the entire exchange. She had arrived 40 minutes earlier to join the meal and had been sitting with her coffee and her notepad when Briggs came through the door. She had watched everything. Her phone had been face down on the table, and at some point in the last 4 minutes, she had turned it face up without anyone noticing. She had her notepad open to a fresh page. There were 4 lines of notes on it in her close, precise handwriting. She watched her uncle cross the room toward her table. She waited until he had sat down. She said, "He is going to come back with paper. We need to be ahead of this before that happens." Harmon was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the room, at the serving volunteers who had resumed their work, with a slight self-conscious quality at the children at the far end, who were too young to understand the specific content of what had just happened, but old enough to understand that something in the room had shifted at the older woman he had been speaking with before Briggs arrived, who was watching him now with a protective concern in her eyes that he found privately both moving and burdensome. He said, "I will pull the deed copy tomorrow morning, first thing. It is settled." He said it without doubt. He said it the way a man says something that he knows to be true, that he has known to be true for 35 years, that is recorded in an official public record, and therefore cannot be unmade by a clipboard or a complaint. Camille picked up her pen. She wrote a fifth line on her notepad. She did not say what she was thinking, which was that the truth of ownership and the recognition of that truth by a man with a clipboard were not the same condition and had never been the same condition, and that the distance between those two conditions was precisely the territory where her entire professional life had been spent. Not because the truth was weak, but because the systems that were supposed to reflect the truth required in their actual operation to be shown the truth in a specific format by a person with the standing to present it, and that the showing and the telling and the standing were all things that could be made difficult by people who had decided for reasons that preceded the specific facts of any given case that the difficulty was the point. She capped her pen. She would begin making calls in the morning. The community meal continued for another 2 hours. The cornbread ran out before the chili did, which was typical. 3 children at the far tables got into an argument about a board game that required adult mediation. One of the volunteer servers dropped a ladle, and the sound of it on the tile floor made several people near the entrance flinch before they recognized what it was. The evening light through the tall windows softened from gold to amber to blue as the hour progressed. Harmon moved through the room as he always moved through it, stopping at each table, learning the names of the people he did not yet know, asking after the families of the people he did. He did not appear diminished. He appeared exactly himself, which was for anyone watching carefully the most precise possible articulation of what Briggs had walked into and what he had comprehensively failed to understand. The 72-hour clock was running. Somewhere across the city, the person who had filed the complaint, whose identity would not surface for weeks, connected through 2 layers of corporate structure to a real estate LLC, with ties to a city council member's donor network interested in the 2.3 acres at the corner of Meridian and Grove Street for reasons that had everything to do with the new condominium development reshaping the blocks surrounding it, was counting the same hours from a different direction, and with a different expectation of how they would end. The deed was exactly what Harmon had said it was. He obtained a certified copy from the county clerk's office at 8:52 the following morning, before the building had been open an hour. The document was clean, professionally recorded without ambiguity in any of its particulars. The parcel at the corner of Meridian and Grove Street, 2.3 acres. Owner of record, Elias J. Harmon. Personal name, no liens, no encumbrances, no organizational transfer of any kind. Mortgage satisfied and formally closed in 2011. Title entirely clear. He brought the copy to the Crestwood PD records desk at 9:45. The officer at the desk, a young man with the expression of someone who had arranged his workday to contain the minimum possible human complication, looked at the deed for approximately 12 seconds, not reading it, but performing a visual scan that would allow him to say he had looked at it. He said, "The complaint has been transferred to city review jurisdiction. This is no longer a police department matter. You need to go to the city inspector's office. 3rd floor municipal building, 4 blocks east." He provided this information with the smooth efficiency of a person accustomed to directing inquiries elsewhere and who had long since stopped feeling anything about it. The city inspector's office on the 3rd floor of the municipal building had no record of a complaint under that address. The clerk who told Harmon this consulted her screen twice to be certain, then looked up with the carefully neutral expression of someone about to deliver a slightly more complicated sentence. She said, "There is a preliminary review request on file, filed by an interested party. I cannot provide the name of the party at this time. The preliminary review is under city attorney jurisdiction." She provided a phone number. Camille was waiting in the corridor outside. She had taken the morning from her office to be present for this. When Harmon came out, she read his expression before he spoke and opened her notepad. She called the city attorney's number from the corridor. She was transferred twice. She reached a voicemail that gave the name of a junior associate attorney and a return call window of 3 to 5 business days. She looked at the notepad. She called the associate's direct line anyway without the voicemail and received a different voicemail. She left a message that was precise and professional and contained in its final sentence a reference to her bar number and the specific statutory provision under which a property owner was entitled to prompt notification of any adverse review action affecting their titled property. They went back to the church. Day 2 and Day 3 moved through the particular architecture of bureaucratic obstruction with a quality of exhaustion that came not from the effort expended, but from the nature of the obstruction itself. The way each office pointed to another office. The way each department cited jurisdiction held elsewhere. The way the complaint seemed to exist as a real and consequential thing, while simultaneously having no precise location in any accessible institutional record. Harmon and Camille spent those 2 days navigating this architecture with methodical patience. They made calls. They sent certified letters with return receipt. They filed formal written requests for records. They asked the specific legal questions that had specific legal weight and waited for responses that were either delayed or not forthcoming. On the afternoon of Day 2, a supervisor at the city attorney's office told them by phone that the preliminary review request had been flagged for expedited processing and would likely be resolved without formal action. Harmon, sitting in the annex office where he had taken the call, felt something in his chest ease slightly. He told Camille when she arrived an hour later. She listened. She did not feel the corresponding ease. Expedited processing in a city attorney's office in her professional experience meant that someone had decided to move the paperwork faster, not that the paperwork was going to say something different. She wrote the update in her notepad and told him it was encouraging news and said they would see what the resolution looked like when it arrived. Day 3, 7:43 in the evening. The after-school tutoring session had finished at 6:30. 8 children were still inside with 2 volunteer tutors waiting for parents who were running behind schedule. The main hall was in cleanup mode, folding tables being wiped down, chairs returned to their storage racks. The evening was cool and dark. October having moved past the pleasant and into the blunt, the sky fully black by 6:15. The sound of 2 patrol vehicles arriving and parking carries through building walls in a specific way. Not just the engines, but the particular quality of silence that follows them. The not driving that is somehow louder than the driving. One of the volunteer tutors walked to the front window. She came back to the homework table with an expression she had already adjusted for the children's benefit, but that 2 of the older students, 15 and 16, old enough to read adults, registered clearly. She said with professional calm, "Everyone, get your backpacks ready. Your parents are going to be here shortly." Harmon was upstairs in his office when one of the meal volunteers knocked on the open door and said, without anything extra in her voice, because she had learned a long time ago that adding things to information before it reached him was not useful, Pastor. "Police on the front steps. 2 of them." He was downstairs in 40 seconds. The front steps of Cornerstone Fellowship Church were 4 broad stone risers, worn smooth and slightly dished at their centers from 35 years of feet. They faced Meridian Street, lit by 2 overhead lamps mounted on the building's facade. A crowd had already formed, congregation members from the cleanup crew who had come to the door when they heard the vehicles. A handful of neighbors from adjacent buildings who had stepped out when they saw the patrol cars. 3 or 4 parents arriving for the tutoring pickup who had found the front entrance occupied by 2 uniformed officers. Briggs was at the top of the steps with his body blocking the front door. His partner stood to his left. Camille was in the crowd. She had arrived 12 minutes earlier to pick up a niece who was in the tutoring program, having decided 2 days before that she would be present at the church during evening hours for the foreseeable future. She had her phone in her hand with the camera open. Her hands were steady. Her expression was controlled with the specific control of someone who is working very hard to ensure that what she is feeling does not interfere with what she needs to do, which was document everything. Briggs held up a printed document when Harmon came through the side door and emerged onto the top step. He said, Notice of temporary closure pending city inspection. This property is under city review effective immediately. All persons must vacate the premises. He said it loudly. He was not speaking to Harmon. He was speaking to the crowd, projecting with the authority of an officer who wanted everyone present to understand the hierarchy of the moment. Harmon said, "I am the titled owner of this land and these buildings. I have a certified deed copy." He produced the copy from inside his jacket. He held it toward Briggs with the calm of a man presenting a document he is entirely confident in. Briggs took it. His eyes moved across the first several lines of the document. Then he handed it back. Briggs said, "This does not match our records. Until the city completes verification of the full ownership chain, this property is under active review and may not be occupied. Sir, I am going to need you to step down off these steps now." He said the last sentence with a quieter precision that was somehow more aggressive than the projection. The sentence was addressed to Harmon, and only Harmon the crowd excluded, and in that exclusion was a message about who had standing to receive certain kinds of speech. And then his hands were on Elias Harmon's shoulders. Two hands placed with intention applying forward and downward pressure. Not violent, not a shove, but firm and deliberate and unmistakable in its meaning. The hands of institutional authority on the body of a man who owned the ground he was standing on. Harmon went down the steps. He did not resist. His body did not pull away or stiffen or try to hold its position. He moved with the hands the way a man moves who has made a decision in advance, who has decided that certain things will happen, and that how he moves through them is the only variable he controls. He took the 4 steps to the sidewalk without stumbling, without rushing, without any of the physical expressions of distress that the moment fully warranted. He stopped at the bottom and turned and looked up at Briggs. His expression was not anger. It was not supplication. It was not confusion or fear. It was something harder to name than any of those things, the expression of a man who is fully, clearly present in a terrible moment, who sees it for exactly what it is, and is choosing deliberately and at cost how to inhabit it. One of the congregation members, a man in his early 40s, a meal volunteer who had been coming every Tuesday for 20 years and whose children had been tutored in this building, and who had known Elias Harmon as a figure of such consistent dignity and care that seeing those hands on his shoulders produced in him a response that moved directly from perception to physical impulse without passing through. Deliberation took 2 steps forward from the crowd. His fists were closed at his sides. His breathing had changed. Harmon turned to him. He did not raise his voice. He held the man's eyes across the space between them and said, "Stand still. This is not how we fight. This is not how." The man's feet stopped. His fists did not open for several seconds. Around him, the crowd held its position not because it was not angry, which it was deeply and viscerally and with absolute justification, but because the man at the bottom of the steps had asked them to hold, and they trusted him in the particular way that people trust someone who has given them years of evidence. The holding cost something. It was visible in how people stood. Briggs came down the steps and stopped in front of Harmon. He had a second document. The trespass notice, the specific legal instrument. Harmon's name typed in the header above the address of the church above the block of official language. He said, "This is a formal trespass notice issued against you personally. Elias Harmon. This address. Do you understand what this means?" He held it out. He was watching the crowd, not Harmon, when he said it. Harmon took the document. He looked at it for a long moment. He held it with both hands, reading it carefully with the thorough attention he had always given to documents. His name was in the header. Below it, the address of the property his father had helped him purchase in 1989. Below that, the language of legal exclusion. In the crowd, a 16-year-old girl who had been tutored in this building since she was 9 years old was watching with the widened recording eyes of someone who is understanding something new about the world and knows she will carry it for a long time. Her mother, who had arrived for pickup, had put an arm around her and pulled her close. The mother was watching too, with an expression that had moved past the particular sadness of someone watching something unjust happen into the deeper, more permanent expression of someone who has been watching things like this happen their entire life and knows that they will watch more of them, and that this knowing is itself a kind of weight. Camille photographed the trespass notice. She photographed Briggs handing it to her uncle. She photographed the crowd. She photographed the closure notice being taped to the front door by Briggs's partner. She worked methodically, moving around the edge of the crowd for angles, her phone steady, her expression giving nothing away that she did not choose to give. Briggs locked the front door. He and his partner walked to the patrol cars, got in, and pulled away from the curb. No urgency, no acknowledgement of anything they were leaving behind. The cars turned onto Grove Street and the taillights disappeared. The crowd remained on the sidewalk. A few people had their phones out. No one spoke loudly. The closure notice on the front door was visible from where they stood, a formal government document taped to the door of a building that the man standing at the bottom of the steps had built over 35 years with his own resources. Harmon stood on the pavement, holding the deed copy in one hand and the trespass notice in the other. Two documents bearing the same address. One saying the land was his, one saying he was not allowed to be there. He was perfectly still. Camille moved through the crowd and came to stand beside him. She did not speak immediately. She let the moment be what it was. Then she said quietly, close to his ear, "I need you to let me work," he said without looking up from the documents in his hands' work. They moved into the annex that night. The annex was a single-room outbuilding at the eastern edge of the property, a utility structure that Harmon had added in 2003 for overflow storage and small group meetings. A squat concrete building with 3 high windows on the east wall and a bathroom and utility sink. It was on the same parcel as the main church, but constituted a separate structure, and the formal closure notice had been written specifically enough, naming the main building, the community hall, and the youth center by their physical addresses, that the annex fell outside its language. Camille had confirmed this in the parking lot while reading the closure document on her phone 3 minutes after the patrol cars left. She sat up at the folding table with her laptop and 2 document folders and a yellow legal pad. The certified deed copy went in the center of the table in its plastic sleeve, the anchor around which everything else would be organized. The annex smelled of stored cardboard and cold concrete, and the faint trace of wood polish from a supply of cleaning materials stored along the south wall. Day 4, 7 o'clock in the morning. A city representative arrived on foot and posted a formal document to the annex door. Camille was already awake. She read it standing in the doorway before Harmon had fully woken from the cot in the back. She came inside and set it on the table. She said, "Preliminary seizure hearing, 9 days from today." The number settled into the room with the particular weight of a deadline that has moved from abstract to concrete. Harmon came from the back and sat at the table. The morning light through the east windows was thin and cold. He read the document without speaking. Camille stood across the table from him with her hands flat on the surface, looking at the document upside down with the practiced ability of someone who has spent years reading things across desks. He said 9 days? She said, "The seizure petition, if Briggs files it formally, requires the city attorney's office to run a mandatory title search. Mandatory by statute, it cannot be bypassed. That search will pull the county deed records. It will find your name. The trespass notice he issued names you as the trespasser on land. The county deed records list as owned by you personally. That is not a complication that can be worked around. It is a legal impossibility." The petition collapses. He said, "And if he does not file the seizure petition?" She said, "Then we fight the closure order directly through the county court, which I am doing regardless. I am filing a parallel ownership challenge today, but the seizure petition is the faster path. It runs through the city attorney's office, which runs through the title search, which produces the result that ends this within days." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Then we hope he is as confident as he appears." She said, "Men like that usually are." By mid-morning, a local news crew had arrived on the sidewalk outside. The story ran that evening on the 5 o'clock broadcast as a property dispute at a local church framed with the careful even-handedness of outlets that cover civic matters without having done the foundational research. The reporter had not pulled the deed records. She had spoken to Briggs's supervisor, who described the situation as a routine code compliance action, and to a congregation member who described it as an outrage, and the broadcast positioned itself between these two descriptions as though they were equally situated claims about a matter whose facts were genuinely uncertain. Camille watched the broadcast on her phone at the folding table and made a note to provide deed documentation to 2 additional media contacts in the morning. The community meals did not happen. The after-school tutoring did not happen. Volunteers who had been coming to Cornerstone Fellowship for years received calls from the coordination chain explaining that the building was inaccessible, pending a legal challenge, that they were working on it, that they expected resolution. Several congregation members organized an informal outdoor meal in the parking lot of a grocery store 4 blocks away, setting up folding tables and slow cookers on the asphalt. And this happened Tuesday evening with more people than anyone had expected. Others found temporary space at a church 3 miles north that had offered its community hall. The network of mutual care that Harmon had built over 35 years was not broken, but it was displaced and improvised, and everyone participating in it understood without needing to say so that they were building something that should not have needed to be built. Day 5, 9 in the morning, Briggs arrived with a crew of 3 men in orange vests with city logo patches. They parked on the Meridian Street side and unloaded equipment from a city works van. Briggs had a manifest. He walked the exterior of the main building with the crew's foreman pointing at items on the list. He came to the back door, the hand-painted wooden sign above it. "This ground is holy because we made it so" was on the manifest. Briggs indicated it to the foreman. The foreman's face did not change. He directed one of the crew members to bring the cordless drill. The removal took less than 2 minutes. 2 screws, a ratcheting sound, and the sign came free of the wall in the hands of a man in an orange vest who had no specific relationship to it except that he had been told to take it down. He carried it around the building to the front and set it against the low brick planter near the front steps, face toward the street, the letters fully visible to anyone on the sidewalk. Harmon was watching from the annex doorway. He had seen the crew arrive. He had watched them move to the back of the building. He had understood when they did not emerge quickly what was happening. He stood in the doorframe with his hands at his sides and did not move. A young woman from the congregation, she was 26, had grown up in this building, had been enrolled in the first year of the after-school tutoring program as a 9-year-old and had come back 3 years ago to volunteer as a tutor herself, was standing on the sidewalk with 2 others when the sign was brought around. She saw it and moved toward it, immediately reaching down to pick it up. Harmon said her name from the annex doorway. His voice carried across the parking lot without effort. He said, "Leave it. Let them show everyone who they are." She stopped. She stood next to the sign and looked at it, lying on the pavement, the letters facing the street. Her face was doing something difficult and controlled at the same time. She looked at him across the parking lot. He held her gaze steadily. She took out her phone. She photographed the sign where it lay. Others did the same. By the end of that morning, photographs of the hand-painted wooden sign on the pavement outside the locked church, the letters legible. The church closure notice visible on the door behind it had been shared in 3 local community groups and were spreading. By afternoon, a journalist from a regional outlet had called Camille's office line. That evening, Day 5, at 4:43 in the afternoon, Briggs filed the formal city seizure petition at the city clerk's office. He filed it with the bearing of a man finalizing something. He had told his supervisor that morning that the ownership question was in his assessment settled enough to proceed, that no credible legal challenge had been filed, that the petty bureaucratic pushback from the pastor's family member attorney would not withstand formal process, and that filing before the weekend would close the window for any last-minute interference. His supervisor, who had not requested a title search, who had not reviewed the deed records, who had operated on the assumption that a complaint filed through the correct channels and processed by an officer with a clear complaint document constituted a sufficient basis approved. Briggs left the city clerk's office at 4:51, 9 minutes before close of business, and the seizure petition was stamped, filed, and entered into the city's pending proceedings index. He was confident. This was not the confidence of someone who has checked the details and found them sound. It was the confidence of someone who has never needed to check the details, because the details in his experience had always arranged themselves in his favor. Camille learned of the filing at 6:27 that evening from a contact at the city clerk's office who had been watching the proceedings on her behalf. She was at the annex folding table, her third cup of coffee at her elbow, 3 document folders open in front of her. She received the text, read it twice, and sat for 30 seconds without speaking. Then something shifted in her face. Not relief. Not yet. The specific clarity of a professional seeing the event she has been anticipating made real the falling into place of a sequence she has been tracking but could not be certain of. She said to the empty room to herself, "He just made a mistake. The petition requires a title search. It is mandatory." She opened her laptop and began working. Harmon sat across the table from her for an hour, his hands folded in front of him, watching her work. She was pulling up statutes on 2 browser windows, cross-referencing filing requirements against the seizure petition language, typing into a document that was accumulating length with the quiet efficiency of someone who knows what they need to say. He did not interrupt. He watched her the way he had watched her since she was a small child, working on something with the specific attention of someone who already knows the answer and is watching someone else find it for themselves. Before she sent him to the cot in the back, she laid it out. She said, "The city attorney's office is required by statute to run a full title search before any seizure hearing can proceed. This is not discretionary. It is written into the seizure proceeding rules. The search pulls county deed records. County deed records list this parcel under your personal name. When the city attorney reads a title search showing Elias J. Harmon as the personal owner of this property, and then reads the trespass notice issued by Officer Briggs, naming Elias J. Harmon as a trespasser on this property, there is no interpretation available to that attorney that makes the petition legally viable. None. It collapses on contact with its own required procedure." She paused. She said, "But I am filing a parallel ownership challenge tonight. I want both mechanisms running simultaneously. I want there to be no question about whether we did everything we could, and I want a documented record that we identified this from day one." She looked at him across the table. He said, "How many days remain?" She said 3. A silence. He said, "My father hung that sign in 1990. The summer after the purchase was final. He was not a complicated man. He said you build with your hands and you name what you build with the truth. I asked him what the sign meant. He looked at me as though I had asked why the sky was up. He said it means what it says. That is all." He paused. His eyes were not on Camille, but on something further, something that was both in the room and behind it. He said, "When they took it down today, I kept hearing his voice. He has been gone 9 years. I kept thinking he would have had something short and clear to say about all of this. He always said things short and clear. I almost heard it." He stopped there. Camille looked at him across the folding table, her laptop open, her pen in her hand. She had known him her entire life. She had loved him for all of it. She had been right to caution him about the ownership structure for years. In this moment, his church locked his father's sign on the sidewalk. 3 days left on a ticking clock was the cost of his not listening, and they both knew it, and neither of them was going to name it, because naming it would be a form of diminishment of something that did not deserve diminishment. She said, "Get some rest." She worked until 3 in the morning. Outside the annex windows, the October night was cold and clear. The kind of night that holds its silence with unusual completeness. No wind. The neighborhood quiet around the locked building and the sign on the sidewalk. Day 8 began in the city attorney's office at 9:12 in the morning. A paralegal named Reyes, who had worked in the office for 6 years and who handled the title search component of all seizure petition filings, pulled up the county assessor's database on her workstation and typed in the parcel address from the Briggs petition. The database loaded. She read the entry. She cross-referenced it against the contact name in the seizure petition. She read the entry again to be certain. She printed it and walked down the hall to the supervising city attorney's office, knocked on the open door, and placed it on the desk. The supervising city attorney was a woman in her mid-50s named Ellis, who had been in the office for 16 years. She had reviewed seizure petitions involving institutional properties many times. She had seen administrative errors in the filing process. She had seen legitimate disputes about organizational authority over properties. She had not previously seen what the printout in front of her showed. She read the title search result. She read the trespass notice attached to the petition file. She set them side by side. She looked at them together. The parcel at Meridian and Grove Street. Owner of record in the county deed index Elias J. Harmon. Personal name, no transfer, no organizational title. Title clear and unencumbered. The trespass notice, issued by Officer Briggs on the 3rd day of the closure action, issued against Elias J. Harmon, prohibiting him from entering the property at the corner of Meridian and Grove Street. The same name, the same address, owner on one document, prohibited party on the other. She looked at the documents for a long moment without picking up the phone. In 16 years in this office, she had developed the habit of letting her mind complete the full circuit of an unusual situation before reacting to it, of tracing it from its current state back to its origin before deciding what the situation required. She traced this one quickly. It did not take long. There was only one place the circuit led. She picked up the phone. She said when the Crestwood PD duty sergeant answered, "I need to speak with the supervisor who approved the Meridian and Grove seizure petition, and I need Officer Briggs's current duty assignment pulled before I speak with anyone else." She said 17 words. They carried the weight of what she had understood in the way that some sentences carry the weight of everything they do not need to say. The seizure petition was withdrawn at 11:43 in the morning. The trespass notice was voided at 11:47. The closure order was formally rescinded at 12:02. Camille received the first call at 11:31 while the withdrawal was still being processed. She was at her office, her phone on speaker, the county court filing system open on her laptop, ready to submit the parallel challenge at the moment she determined it was still necessary. She listened to the caller, a junior attorney from the city attorney's office, speaking carefully, in the way of someone conveying information they did not generate for 45 seconds without speaking. She said, "I need the withdrawal confirmation in writing within 1 hour. I need the formal rescission paperwork hand-delivered to the property address. I need written confirmation that the trespass notice is voided in the city's records and that Officer Briggs is removed from any connection to this case." She said it standing up with the clean brevity of someone who has been preparing these sentences for 8 days and does not need to think about them. When she ended the call, she sat down. She placed both hands flat on her desk. She pressed them down as though grounding herself through the surface. She breathed twice, slowly. Then she called her uncle. He answered on the second ring. She said, "It is over. The petition is withdrawn. The trespass notice is voided. The closure order is rescinded. You can go back in." The silence on the line lasted long enough that she checked to confirm the call had not dropped. Then he said, "All right." 2 words. A low, unhurried baritone. The sound of a man receiving something he has been holding himself in readiness for without knowing exactly when it would come, the sound of a body finally releasing a posture it has held for 8 days. She said, "I will meet you there." A city representative arrived at Cornerstone Fellowship Church at 2:40 in the afternoon. He was a mid-level municipal administrator who had spent much of the afternoon drawing the short end of a sequence of internal office negotiations about who would go to the church in person. He removed the closure notice from the front door the tape had been on for 8 days and required some effort, and handed the formal rescission paperwork to Harmon with a minimal amount of eye contact. He was back in his car and pulling away from the curb within 4 minutes of arriving. Harmon stood at the open front door of his church with the rescission document in his right hand. The afternoon light was the particular October light of a day past its peak, angled and specific, finding the stone of the front steps and the brick of the facade with a clarity that made everything look more itself than it did in flatter light. The smell from inside the building reached him across the threshold wood and upholstered pew cushions and the trace memory of decades of meals and gatherings. The specific smell of a place that has been continuously inhabited by the same community for a very long time. He stood for a moment and looked at the open door. Then he walked around the building. He went along the side path past the low planter around the corner to the Meridian Street sidewalk. The sign was where it had been for 5 days, propped against the brick planter with its face to the street. This ground is holy because we made it so. The paint was 34 years old, but it had not faded beyond legibility. His father had used a good quality exterior paint, the kind chosen by a man who intended the thing to last. The wood had darkened over the decades, but had not warped. The grain of it was still visible beneath the paint, the texture of the original material present through the layers applied to it. It was solid. It was real. It had been made by a man's hands with full intention. Harmon bent down and picked it up with both hands. He straightened and held it for a moment, looking at it. It was lighter than he remembered, or he was steadier than he had been 5 days ago. He tucked it under his arm and carried it back around the building, through the side path, through the back door, into the corridor inside. Camille was waiting in the main hallway. She had arrived while he was on the sidewalk. She was still in her coat, her briefcase at her feet, standing in the middle of the corridor with the stillness of someone who has been waiting and knows the wait is almost done. She saw him come through the door with the sign under his arm. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. There was nothing to say that would have been equal to the moment. They both understood this. Camille reached out and rested her hand briefly on his arm, one brief direct gesture of acknowledgement, and then she picked up her briefcase. They walked into the building together. The silence after justice is not a loud thing. It is a stillness that has a texture to it, the texture of everything that needed to happen, having happened, the structure of the past 8 days settling into its final form. It does not require witnesses. It does not require ceremony. It only requires that the people who have been living through the thing are present at its end, and that they recognize what they are inside. They were inside it. They recognized it. The story broke fully in the news cycle that evening when the formal rescission was confirmed by the city attorney's office and reporters began making calls. The framing reversed the way that framing reverses when the foundational fact of a story turns out to be categorically different from what was initially reported. The phrase that traveled was the one that captured the legal paradox most cleanly. The officer had issued a trespass notice against the owner of the property and then filed a seizure petition that required a title search, and the title search had proved the trespass notice impossible. The irony of it that Briggs's own aggressive escalation, his confident formal filing, had been the precise action that produced the document that destroyed his case, was the detail that moved the story from local to regional. Briggs was placed on administrative review by end of business. The Departmental Internal Affairs investigation findings released 22 days later were specific failure to verify property ownership before issuing a trespass notice, filing a false trespass instrument against a titled property owner, conduct unbecoming an officer. He was suspended without pay, the investigation remaining open for further determination. His supervisor, whose approval had not included a title search, was placed on a performance review. The original complaint was traced through the public records process to a real estate LLC incorporated 2 years prior. The LLC's registered agent was the same registered agent for a development corporation that had filed a formal interest in the Meridian and Grove Street parcel with the city planning office 14 months earlier. The development corporation had documented Ty's board membership donor records, meeting attendance to a city council member who had been an advocate for rezoning the district surrounding Cornerstone Fellowship's block. The council member announced within the week that he would not seek re-election. His statement cited personal reasons and offered no comment on the investigation. Camille filed the civil rights complaint in federal district court on a Monday morning 3 weeks after the rescission. Section 1983. Civil rights violation under color of law. Abuse of process. Racially discriminatory enforcement of a trespass instrument. The complaint was comprehensive and specific, built from Camille's 8 days of methodical documentation. The photographs, the notes, the certified letters, the call records, the timeline of events that showed step by step, and with the kind of evidentiary precision that her 11 years of practice had prepared her to construct what had been done and how and by whom and with what pattern of institutional neglect making it possible. The district court accepted the complaint and assigned it to a judge with a record of thorough attention to civil rights matters. On a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after the rescission at 8:20 in the morning, Camille picked up her uncle from the church. They drove to the county recorder's office together. She had prepared the paperwork herself, a formal deed notice for entry into the county public index, recording the parcel under Harmon's personal name with a notation of the full ownership history. The 1989 purchase, the co-signed private loan. The original deed, recording the mortgage satisfaction in 2011. The present clear title. The notice was formatted according to the county's recording standards, which Camille knew without needing to look them up, and was intended to ensure that any future search of the property address would surface Harmon's personal ownership within the first results, rather than requiring navigation through institutional layers. The county recorder's office was a government building with the specific atmosphere of places where official things are made permanent: fluorescent lighting, laminate countertops, the smell of paper and institutional cleaning products. A row of clerks behind a low counter performing functions that were ordinary in their daily texture and permanent in their cumulative effect. The clerk who received them was a woman in her 40s with reading glasses on a chain, who looked at the document Camille provided with the focused attention of a professional, confirming that the paperwork is correct before applying the instrument that makes it real. Harmon signed at the counter. He used his pen, the plain black ballpoint he kept in his shirt pocket, the same one he had used at his desk 3 weeks before when he signed the tax renewal form, the same style of pen he had used for 40 years. His signature was deliberate, unhurried, exactly itself. The clerk stamped the document. The sound of the stamp was clean and singular. Camille filed it. They walked out of the recorder's office into the November morning. The air was cold and carried the smell of a rain that had come through 2 hours earlier. The pavement still darkened with it, the light flat and clear in the way of late autumn. They stood for a moment on the front steps without speaking. Camille said, "Now anyone can find it in 30 seconds. He said, "Should have done it years ago." He said it without self-recrimination, without edge, without any of the things that the statement could have carried given the preceding weeks. It was a simple acknowledgement, the clear, direct recognition of a man who can see both directions from where he is standing, who sees what was and what now is, and who names the gap between them plainly because plainness is the form his honesty takes. Camille looked at him. She had known him for 38 years. She had gone into law partly because of him, because of watching him build something real and good over decades, and understanding from that, watching that real and good things required instruments as good as themselves to survive. She had told him for years in the professional way she had that the ownership structure was an exposure. He had told her in the quiet, final way he had that the deed was recorded, and the work was evidence of itself. They were both right. They had always been right. They had been right from different angles on the same true thing, and the past 3 weeks had been the cost of the gap between those angles, and neither of them needed to say this because they both already knew it completely. They got in the car. The church reopened the following Tuesday. The first event back was the community meal. Harmon was in the kitchen at 7 in the morning with the volunteers moving between the prep tables with the same quiet attention he brought to all of it, the same learning of names, the same specific care for each person in the room. The smell of chili was in the building by 8:30, and by 11 the line on the front steps was longer than any Tuesday in recent memory. Not just the regular congregation members and neighborhood families, but people who had seen the story in the news. People from other parts of the city who had not been to Cornerstone Fellowship before, people who had simply decided that being present mattered, who understood, without being able to articulate it precisely, that what had been defended here deserved to be witnessed in its continuation. Camille arrived at noon and stood near the side wall with a cup of coffee watching. She watched her uncle move through the room with the same unhurried completeness she had been watching her whole life. The handshake that became a real greeting. The question that showed he had remembered what you told him last time, the full attention given to each person for the duration of that person's moment with him. It was not a performance. It had never been a performance. It was a conviction about what another person deserved expressed in action every time without calculation. She stayed an hour and slipped out quietly to get back to her desk. She paused at the front door on her way out. The sign was above it. Not above the back door, where it had hung for 34 years, visible to the parking lot congregation, but invisible from the street. Above the front door, hung at eye level when you stepped back to look up. Facing Meridian Street, facing the sidewalk, facing the corner of Grove, where the new condominiums were going up on land that someone had calculated would be more valuable without what stood on this corner. This ground is holy because we made it so. The paint was old. The wood darkened the letters formed by a man who had been gone 9 years. It faced the street now. It said to everyone who passed what it had always said to the people who came in from the parking lot. The difference was not in the sign. The difference was in the direction it was pointing. Inside the office, on the corner of the desk, the current year's property tax exemption renewal form was already signed. Elias J. Harmon. The same signature. The same address, the same county record it had always been, now indexed in the public register with a notation of the full history findable in 30 seconds by anyone who looked. If you have not yet subscribed to this channel, now is the moment. Every week there is another story, another case where the truth that was always present finally becomes undeniable, where the records that were always there are finally read. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you are there when the next one lands. Some men build things that outlast the people who try to take them. Not because the building was done in secret, or with protection, or with any strategy designed to prevent what Darnell Briggs attempted, but because the building was done with care over time, with the kind of thoroughness that leaves a record so complete that when someone finally tries to read against it, the record reads back. The trespass notice bore the name of the man who owned the land. The seizure petition required the search that found the deed. The deed carried the name that ended the case. None of these things happened by accident. They happened because a man had kept his affairs in order for 35 years, because he had signed the right documents and paid the right obligations and recorded the right records, because a county clerk had stamped the right papers in 1989 and filed them in the place where they would wait without anyone needing to tend them until the day they were needed. Quiet dignity will always outlast loud prejudice, and a deed filed in good faith will always outlast a complaint filed in bad faith. The files were always in the same building. One of them just needed more time to be read.